I was on the Titanic. I know that is what you want to hear about. I know that is the first thing anyone thinks when they learn my name, when they see my face, when they sit down across from me with that particular look. The look that says they have already decided what kind of story this is going to be. A disaster story, a survival story, a story about cold water and lifeboats and the sound a ship makes when it breaks in two. I will tell you about all of that someday, maybe, but not today. Today I want to tell you about why I was on that ship in the first place. Because nobody ever asks about that. Nobody ever asks what a 20-year-old boy from a village in County Sligo was doing standing on the deck of the largest ocean liner ever built, watching the coast of Ireland disappear behind him. Nobody asks what he was running toward. They only ever ask what he survived. My name is Kieran Doyle. I was born on the 9th of February 1891 in a townland called Carrowmore, which is a small and quiet place near Sligo town in the west of Ireland. My mother raised 6 children in a house with 2 rooms and a hearth that smoked badly in wet weather, which in County Sligo means it smoked 9 months of the year. My father worked other men's land. We ate, we were clothed, we were, by the standards of that place and that time, not badly off. But there was a ceiling in that life, and everyone who grew up in it could see the ceiling clearly from the moment they were old enough to look up. America was not an abstraction to us. It was a place where specific people had gone. Seamus Brennan from the next townland over had gone in 1903 and sent back money. The Connolly girls, all three of them, had gone to Boston in 1906 and found work in the textile mills and sent back a photograph of themselves in good coats standing on a street that looked wide enough to lose yourself in. There was a man named Paddy Feeney whose brother had gone to New York in 1899 and was now, by all accounts, working on the railways and earning more in a week than my father earned in a month. These were not rumors. These were facts, passed from house to house with the careful attention people give to information that might one day save their lives. I decided I was going when I was 14 years old. I did not tell my mother for another 6 years. The plan, such as it was, came together slowly. I worked, I saved. I took whatever work came, farm labor, turf cutting, a year and a half working for a merchant in Sligo town who sold cloth and hardware and was not a generous employer but was a punctual one, meaning he paid on the day he said he would pay, which was not nothing. I saved £4, then £6, then £9. By the spring of 1912, I had enough for the passage, and enough left over to survive the first weeks in New York without begging. I was 21 years old. I was going to America. I was going to find work and save money and bring my mother over, and my younger sister Bridget, who was 15 and clever and deserved more than Carol Moore could offer her. That was the plan. Not glory, not adventure, work and money and a better ceiling than the one I had grown up under. I booked third class on the Titanic because it was the newest ship on the route and because the word was that The third class accommodations were better than on the older ships. That is the truth of it. I did not book the Titanic because of any sense of occasion or history. I booked it because the conditions were reported to be better and the price was competitive, and I was a careful young man who had spent 6 years saving £9 and was not going to spend it carelessly. £11, 7 shillings and sixpence was the price for the passage. I remember the exact number because I counted the money out 3 times before I handed it over. The night before I left, my mother made a meal that used more of what we had than she could properly afford. She did not cry, not in front of me. She was a woman who had learned early that crying in front of people did not help matters. She packed my bag herself, folding each item with a deliberateness that I understood, even at 21, was her way of putting something of herself into every mile of the journey ahead. She put a small medal of St. Brendan at the bottom of the bag, tucked into the corner, and she did not mention it. I found it when I unpacked in Queenstown. I kept it. I still have it. The train to Queenstown took most of a day. I had never been that far from Carramore before. I had never seen a city the size of Queenstown, which by any reasonable standard was not a large city at all, but which to me, arriving on a train for the first time, felt enormous and indifferent, the way cities are indifferent to single people passing through them. The Titanic was anchored in the harbor. You tendered out to it on a small boat, and when you came alongside it, the ship did not look real. It looked like a cliff that had been made by people. It rose out of the water at a scale that my eyes kept refusing to accept. I had seen photographs. The photographs had not prepared me. I stood on the tender looking up at the hull, and I thought about my father. I thought about him specifically, about his hands, which were rough from 30 years of other men's fields, about the way he had shaken my hand the morning I left, the way he had held it for a moment longer than a handshake required, and then let go without a word. He was not a man who said things, but he had held my hand a moment longer, and I understood what that meant. I was going to make something. That was what it meant. I was going, and I was going to make something, and it was going to be worth the leaving. Below decks, in third class, the ship was a world I had not expected. There were people from everywhere, Syrians and Swedes and Croatians and Finns and Irish in numbers, Poles and Armenians, and Lebanese families with children who ran the corridors and laughed in languages I could not identify. We were all going to the same place for the same reason, more or less. We were all pointed at the same ceiling and going somewhere it did not exist. There was a fellowship in that, a wordless fellowship that did not require shared language. You saw it in how people shared bread, in how the men made room without being asked, in how the women looked after children that were not theirs when a mother needed to sleep. I made friends with a man named Alexander from Poland, whose name I have anglicized somewhat because the original had a combination of letters my tongue never mastered. He was 24. He was going to Chicago, where he had a cousin who had found work in the stockyards. He did not speak much English, but he had a pack of cards and he played with an absolute commitment to winning that I found admirable and annoying in equal measure. He taught me three Polish words in the 4 days before the ship hit the ice. I could not tell you today what any of them meant. I have felt guilty about that for 40 years, and I imagine I will feel guilty about it for however many years remain to me. There was music in the evenings. People brought instruments, fiddles, a concertina, something with strings I could not name. The dancing was not elegant. The floor space was not designed for dancing, but people danced anyway, the way people dance when they are frightened and hopeful in equal measure and need somewhere to put both feelings. I danced twice, both times with a girl from Cork whose name I never learned because we did not speak enough of each other's language to exchange names, but who danced with a ferocity that I admired. I think of her sometimes. I do not know what became of her. The night the ship hit the ice, I was asleep. That is the honest account. I was asleep in my bunk and I felt the shudder and I lay still for a moment trying to decide if it was a dream. And then the quality of the silence changed, the engine stopped, and I knew it was not a dream. I am not going to tell you what happened after that. I said at the beginning that I would not, and I meant it, and I am old enough now to say what I mean and hold to it. What I will tell you is this. I arrived in New York on the Carpathia on the 15th of April 1912, wearing borrowed clothes and carrying nothing except my mother's St. Brendan medal, which I had in my coat pocket and which I held in my fist for the entire crossing from the North Atlantic to New York Harbor. I had 11 pounds, 7 shillings and sixpence when I boarded the Titanic. I had nothing when I arrived in New York, nothing except the medal and the plan. I kept the plan. I found work within 2 weeks of arriving in a warehouse near the East River, lifting and carrying for $1.25 a day. I shared a room in a boarding house in Lower Manhattan with three other men, Irish all of them, and the room smelled of damp wool and coal, and the particular exhaustion of men who work with their bodies all day and fall into sleep quickly at night. I saved money. I moved to better work. I brought my mother over in 1914 and Bridget in 1915. My mother lived in New York until 1938. She never went back to Carrowmore. She said she had no reason to. Bridget became a school teacher. She retired in 1959 after 33 years in the same school in Brooklyn. She taught reading to the children of immigrants, Italians and Puerto Ricans and Chinese, the same children of the same dream that had brought me across in third class on the biggest ship in the world. I think about that sometimes, the continuity of it, the way the dream does not belong to any one people but moves through them, one generation at a time, each one carrying it a little further than the last. That is what I was doing on the Titanic. I was carrying the dream. That is the whole story.